In today's video, we're going over everything that you need to know to start designing and prototyping with Figma. So if you've never used Figma before and you want to learn it, this is the video to get you started. We'll be going over all the basics, the tools, the UI of Figma, and by the end of it, we'll have designed and prototyped this website with this login form that slides over when we click login, and when we hit create account, it slides back. So we'll be designing and prototyping this throughout the video. So this is Figma in 30 minutes. Let's get started. So once you download Figma, it'll look something like this once you're already logged in, and we're just going to go up and create a brand new design file. So let's quickly go over the UI just so we know where everything is located, and then we'll start designing and learning the tools as we go. First up, we have the toolbar, which is in the top left. The tools from left to right are the Move tool, Frame tool, the Shape tools, Pen tool, Text tool, Hand tool, and the Comment tool. In the top center, you have the file name. You can click on that to change it if you'd like, as well as the file location. By default, all of your projects will go into drafts unless you've upgraded your account to create a team, in which case you can choose which folder you'd like to move or save your file. Moving on to the top right, Figma is a collaborative tool, so you can start a conversation with this button and actually have like a meeting in here and discuss what you're working on. Next to that, it shows you the profile icon of everyone that's working in the document currently. You have the share option to invite people to the document, as well as the present option, which allows you to preview your design and your prototype and take a look at it. Following that up, you have the zoom and view options. And if you click the drop down, you've got some more zoom controls, as well as things like pixel grid, rulers, and other things tucked away in here. And before we continue on here with the UI of Figma, I want to let you guys know about today's sponsor. So sponsoring today's video is Milanote. Milanote is a long-term sponsor here on the channel, and I pretty much use Milanote every day to map out and plan all of my creative projects. As a full-stack designer, Milanote is a crucial part of my workflow as I utilize it as a project hub. From adding simple notes and to-do lists to creating full detailed brainstorming boards and mood boards. And not to mention that Milanote is collaborative, so I review with my clients inside of Milanote when we're going over the different design iterations for a project. So if you're looking for a tool to map out and plan your creative ideas and projects, check out the link at the top of the description and sign up for Milanote. So back to the Figma UI, on the left-hand side, you have the Layers panel. So the Layers panel works pretty much like most design tools. When I create a rectangle, it shows up in the Layers panel. It's got a nice little icon next to it, letting me know what that element is. I can double-click to rename it and lock it if I don't want it to move, or show or hide it with the little eyeball icon. If I were to create another rectangle and then select both of them and then group them together, you can see I now have a group, and then these two rectangles are inside of this group. And of course, you can organize and rearrange elements by clicking and dragging on them in the Layers panel as well. Above that, you'll see I have pages open. You can click the drop down to show that and hide that here. And if I were to create a new page, I now have a blank work area, so I can start working on something separate or a different aspect of my design. You can right click on pages to rename or delete them. I'll just go ahead and delete that page. Next up is the assets panel. And if you create a component, so if I grab this rectangle and I make that a component for whatever reason, all my local components will show up here in this panel, as well as the libraries. So if I click this book, I can see all my team libraries. For example, I recently created my team, so Figma auto-generated this nice color palette and some type options for me. And so I can toggle that on and off here. So if I were to go and pre-build a full design system, I can simply toggle that on or off and start working with it. So here I have this rectangle, and I can go over here and let's say fill. And since I've toggled on that library, I've got these nice fill options from that library right here, and I can easily use them. Finally, on the right, you have the design panel for editing your different design properties. When you have nothing selected, you can edit the background color, for example, and choose your different export settings. When you have a rectangle selected, you can see the different properties that you can adjust, like I can add a stroke or different effects. And this panel will change slightly based on what elements you have selected, giving you a little bit more controls for those unique elements. Another thing we have over here on the right is the prototype tab for setting up your flows and interactions, and we'll dive into setting up interactions later in this video. And then finally, you have the inspect panel giving you a general overview of the element you have selected. This is really helpful for developers. It gives them code like CSS or even Android or iOS. They can copy this or reference it. Really helps in the design to development handoff. So next up, let's cover how you move around and navigate in Figma. So if you have a trackpad, it's super easy. You can use two fingers to just move around in here, and you can pinch to zoom in and zoom out. So trackpad's really nice for using something like Figma. But if you don't have a trackpad, you can still do all of that. You can hold down Z on the keyboard to give you the zoom tool, and then you can just click and drag out an area you want to zoom in. Then if you want to move around, you can hold down spacebar, and as long as you're holding down spacebar, you'll have access to the hand tool. So you can just click and drag to move around in here, and then you can release the spacebar to go back to your selection tool. So that's a little quicker than going up and grabbing it manually each time. So of course, the selection tool is going to allow you to click on elements and move them around. To go inside of groups, so right now I have this group together, you just double click to go to the next level down, and you can keep doing that to grab a hold of the element you're looking for. And a cool shortcut you can use is you can hold down Command, and then you can click on an element directly, so it goes through all of those different groups and just grabs a hold of it without you having to double click to get inside of each group. So it's a nice shortcut to memorize. And speaking of shortcuts, it can always be a little overwhelming trying to memorize them in a new software. So in the bottom right, they have this question mark icon, and you can go to keyboard shortcuts to pull up this nice panel of all the different shortcuts here in Figma. So you can reference those and learn them as you go. The ones in blue are the ones you've used before. So for example, I've never used the arrow tool shortcut before. Probably never will, to be honest. So now that we've covered the UI, let's actually start learning Figma by actually using it. So I'm going to hit F on the keyboard for the frame tool, also located right here in the toolbar. To create a frame, you can simply click and drag to drag out a custom size one. Or with the frame tool selected, in the design tab, you have these various presets. Today, I'm going to go with the MacBook Pro 16-inch. So frames are one of the unique elements to Figma that I absolutely love. So unlike a artboard or canvas in a typical design software, you can actually customize a frame. You can add strokes and various effects to them and pretty much customize them in any way you want. But you can also have frames inside of other frames. So if I create a card-shaped frame here, I can customize this frame by adding a fill color to it. So let's give it a gray. And then I can add a rectangle here in the top right corner as a profile icon. And all of that is inside of this new frame. So I can build out like a card or a button or any element with a frame and add it to another frame. And then I can go a step further and then create a new frame inside of that other frame. So now I have frame 2 inside of frame 1 that's inside of a MacBook Pro frame. So just so much more you can do with a frame than a typical artboard or canvas. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete all these extra frames. And now we're left with our MacBook Pro frame. The first thing I like to do when I design is add some kind of grid or layout to help me lay out my design. We can simply select our frame, and then we can go to Layout Grid and select the plus icon to add a grid. I want to use a column grid, so we can click on the icon, and then we can go to the dropdown and select columns. So let's do a typical 12 column layout for our website. I'll just type in 12, and we can also change the color of that by clicking on the swatch. And we'll leave the margin at 0. So I want the left and right side to be touching the edge of our frame. So now we have a nice column grid, and we can toggle this on and off by Control G on Mac to easily see through our frame. Anytime we need to remove it, we can do that. So let's go ahead and take advantage of frames, and I'm going to grab another one with F on the keyboard and drag out another frame. And I'm going to make this 5 columns wide and the same height as our MacBook screen. I'm going to go double click on the name to rename it, and I'll just call it login frame. And we're going to create our actual login form inside of this frame. So we can give it a fill color of white. And then I'll grab the MacBook Pro frame and I'll change its fill color to a gray color so we can see the different frames for now. With our login frame selected, let's go ahead and start building out our login form. I'm going to hit T on the keyboard for the type tool, and you can either click to just start typing, or you can click and drag to drag out an area, which is what I'm going to do. And I'll put in some text. And for this design, I'm going to be doing a kind of real estate website. So I just put building your dream home. And we're going to go ahead and change the text properties over here in the design panel. So let's grab a new font. I'm going to grab a hold of Poppins, and we'll set that to a bold weight since it's a heading. And then we can set the font size. I'm going to set it to 64 points, but you can also type in a number of your choosing if you don't like any of the default Figma sizes. And of course, we have other options here. For example, we can select this option, which is an auto width. So as long as the text will be the size of the width, or ours was automatically on this option, which was a fixed size since I chose the width myself. And then below that, you have some different options here. So you can choose to align the text to the top of this box. So if I were to make it bigger, I can align it to the bottom, or I can align it in the middle. For now, I'm just going to go with the top. And I'm also going to choose this middle option, which is the auto height. So it's just going to snap that to the bottom of the text, and it's going to expand with that. So let's put this 60 points from the top of our frame. So I'm holding Option or Alt see these different measurements with that element selected, and then I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard to move this around. Let's also put that 60 from the left-hand side of this frame. If we go down here in the text properties, we have these 3 dots. We can grab some more details here. And so I'm actually going to set this to all capital by going down to case and selecting uppercase. So with T on the keyboard once more, I'm just going to click this time and we'll start creating an email address field. So I'll just type out email address, and to create visual hierarchy, we need to make this smaller than this large heading. So we'll drop the font size down to 20 points. And I'm actually going to leave this at bold since I want this to stand out. And then we're going to put that 60 points from the left side of the frame. Next, let's go up to the shape tool and actually grab a line, and we'll drag out an underline for the bottom of our text input field. So I dragged that out holding shift to make sure it was a perfectly straight line. And the width on mine is 588, which allows for 60 points on both the left and right side of our frame. We can go to the stroke and we can bump that up to a 4 just to make it a little bit thicker and it stands out more. And we'll put that 90 points below our email address heading. So one thing you can do here is you can hold shift and then hit the arrow key and it moves in increments of 10 just to move that a little bit quicker. And so we now have this email address field. So next, let's grab a hold of that underline just by clicking on it. And then we can hold shift to grab both of the elements. Then I'm going to hold option or alt and drag down a duplicate of it. And I'm going to put that 60 points below that other underline. Then we can change the heading on this one to say password. So now we have our 2 input fields. Let's actually create some text for the typical placeholder. So T on the keyboard. For our placeholder text, we'll put that 14 points above the underline. And then let's go and adjust this down to a semi-bold. And we'll also scale this down to a 16-point font. And we'll need to give this a new color. I'm just going to give it a custom color of BCC0C6, which is a nice gray color with just a little bit of blue in there. And then we also need to click on these 3 dots and remove the uppercase by just going to the dash, and that will just leave it as it was typed in. Then with it selected, we'll hold option and drag out a duplicate and put this one 14 points from that underline as well. And then we'll change the placeholder text. So now it's starting to look a little bit more like a form. To make our underlines a little bit more subtle, let's go ahead and click on them, hold shift to grab both. And then we can change the stroke color on these to 373737. And that just lightens those up a little bit so they don't stand out as much as the full black headings do. To save time, I'm just going to hold option or alt and drag out a duplicate of that password text. And I'm going to position it 30 points from the bottom of our last input field. And we'll change the text onto this to the forgot password option. Again, I need to remove the uppercase, so I'll just go ahead and remove that. And let's drop it down to 16 points, and we will remove the bold and drop that down to a semi-bold. We'll make sure that is 60 points from the right side of our frame. Then R on the keyboard for a rectangle. Let's drag out a rectangle. That's the same width as these lines, which is 588. And we'll drag that up to be about 80 in height. We'll set that to a black color. And then we can add some text inside of that. So T on the keyboard. And our text is currently behind our rectangle. So I'm going to drag it in the layers panel above. You can also hit right square bracket key on the keyboard to bring that in front, and left square bracket key to send it all the way to the back. So now we can select that text, hold shift and grab the rectangle, and we can start to use our alignment tools up here. So this one right here is align horizontally center, and then we'll need to align it vertically center as well. And that will center that text inside of this rectangle. I'm then going to position this rectangle 60 points from the bottom of the forgot password. And so now we have a nice button. So I'm going to hit Command G to group that together, and we'll just call this button. So here's what it's looking like so far. Let's add one final thing and then we'll be done with our form. I'm going to grab this text and copy it holding option and dragging out a duplicate. I'm going to say already have an account, log in, and then we'll put that 60 points from the bottom of our button, positioning that with the arrow keys. Since we want the login to stand out, but we're using a black color, what we can do is we can double click to go edit our text, click and drag to grab a hold of that text. Then we can go into our text options and select a underline decoration. That'll make that pop out a little bit more, letting you know that you can click on it. So now that we have that laid out, we can simply select our login frame and we can go down to this selection colors area. And I don't want anything to be pure black in this design. So I'm just going to replace that with a color code of 1E, 1E, 1E. And the super cool thing about that is everything that's set to black is going to auto adjust. So you can see that if I change it to a red color, everything that is currently set to black is updating with that. So we'll just set that to that nice color code. And now that we're at this point, the last thing I want to do here is I actually want to bump down everything that we have in here except that heading. So I'm going to slide all this down until it's 80 points from the bottom of our frame. So now that we have our completed login frame, I quickly want to pause our design here just to show you two key features of Figma. So let's go over those now. Let's say we need to later adjust this and make it a little bit wider so we can scale the frame out. Well, everything else is staying exactly where it is. And that's where the power of constraints comes in. So I can go in and I can see where everything is constrained. And by default, everything is constrained to the top and the left. And you can see that with these little dashed blue lines. So if I want to adjust this, I can. So for example, let's grab a hold of our button. And instead of having it just on the left, we'll go to the drop down and we'll say we want it to scale with the left and the right. Now with the text below it, we're going to want that centered. So we can set that to be centered. And so now if I grab the frame and I start to scale it, you can see that those are scaling accordingly, which is allowing me to make better responsive layouts and a lot quicker. You can take advantage of these really when you're designing something for mobile, and then maybe you got to switch to a larger size for an iPad. Using your constraints well will save you a ton of time. So you'll notice that my text inside of my group did not expand the way I wanted it, and I need to change the constraints on the actual text. So I can do that, and I can choose to go to the center with that one. So now when I grab a hold of the frame, my text is actually staying centered inside of my button. Another quick thing I wanted to go over here in Figma is components and different component states. So here we have this button, and we've just called it button. I'm going to go ahead and drag that out of our frame and off to the side. So one cool thing we can do is make this a component, and you can do that with this icon here in the top center when you have something selected. So we can hit create component. We can leave this over in maybe another page, for example, called master components if you'd like. And when you go to the assets panel, you always have this component here that you can drag out another instance. So you'll notice that when I click on this one, it's got that nice purple outline letting me know that it is a component, but this one always has that little icon next to it and this one does not. That's letting me know that that is the master component. And the reason you want to do this is, let's say you have a billion of them over here throughout your design and your client says, we don't like that button, change the text size, make it a little bit bigger. So you would have to painfully go and change every single one of them. Well, since we're using a component, we can always go back to the master and we can change that font size to 24. And now if we look over here, all of our other ones change. So if I change it back down to 16, they all automatically update. And that's the power of components. But if I want to change an instance, it's not going to apply everywhere. So for this instance, I want to change this button to red. Well, since it's not the master, it does not affect the rest of them. So that's one of the main reasons you would want to use a component for different elements that you're going to be duplicating throughout your design and reusing. So let's go ahead and position this back in our design for now. And we'll finish the left side of our MacBook screen. So I'm actually going to rename this now, and we'll just call this design frame. So what I'm going to do is grab a rectangle and just drag one out. And I'm actually just going to fill the leftover area over here. And so now that we have that rectangle there, we can go to the fill. And here in the fill, you also have other options. From this drop down, you can choose a linear gradient, for example, or a radial gradient. You have all these different gradient options, but I want to go for an image. So I'm just going to click choose image, and I just select my image from my folder. And I'm not really liking the position of this. I want a very particular aesthetic. So I'm going to go to fill here and drop down and select crop. And of course, you have all kinds of other different things you can adjust, like the shadows, highlights, and really get your image looking good. But for now, what I want to do is I'm not actually going to adjust the crop. I'm going to adjust the image size itself. So I'm just going to scale this. And if I hold shift, it keeps the same aspect ratio. So if I release shift, you can see the image is scaling all wonky and it's distorting the image. So I'll hold shift and I'll just scale this into the position that I want it. And once I have the crop that I'm happy with, all I have to do is just exit out and I have this nice image over here. Let's actually select that rectangle now, and we'll go over here and apply a fill on top of it. So we're layering a black fill, and we'll change that to 30% opacity. So just darkening that a little bit. And then let's put a logo in the top left corner. So T for the type tool once more. And then for this, we'll set it to a 36-point font, and we'll bump it up to bold. And then I also want to change this to uppercase. And we'll position that in the top left corner, 60 from the left side of the frame and 60 from the top. So now we're going to make this more of a website. So we're going to need some links. So what I'm going to do is just type out some text. And for this, we're going to drop that down to a paragraph size font, which is 16. And we'll remove the bold, and let's go with semi-bold on that. And then we'll hold Option and drag out a duplicate and create a few more of these. And once more. And I'm going to hold Shift and grab all of them. And then I want to remove the uppercase. So I'll just set that to as typed. And so with all three of those links, I'm going to hold Shift to grab a hold of them and then hit Command G to group them. And now we have auto layout. So we can use auto layout to adjust the layout automatically for us. So I can set it to stack vertically or horizontally with these arrows. Then I can adjust the space in between. So I'm going to set it to 60. Instead of having me drag that by hand, it auto adjusts it for me. And then you have other values, like you can say how you want it to align. For example, I want mine to align on the right, and you can adjust different padding options, which doesn't really apply to the group that I have here. We'll go more over auto layout in just a second. But now that we have these new links, let's align this to the baseline of our logo. So you'll notice when I'm dragging this around, you'll see these red smart guides. I just want that to align on the baseline of that text. And then we'll slide that over and have this 80 points from the right side of the frame, giving it a little bit of an asymmetric look. So we've got 80 spacing on the right, and then over here we have 60. So let's play around with auto layout with a frame now. So F on the keyboard, and I'm just going to drag out a frame. And I'm going to set the height of this frame to 68. And I'm just going to drag this frame down here out of the way, and we'll give it a fill for now of white. So let's go ahead and create a button that allows people when they click it to watch a video of a virtual tour of this place that they're featuring on the left. So first thing I want to do is grab the ellipse tool, and that is O on your keyboard. I'm going to hold Shift and drag out a circle. By holding Shift, it keeps the same aspect ratio, so it's making it a circle instead of like an oval. Once we have that, we can go up here and grab a polygon and just hold Shift to drag one of those out as well. And I'm going to go and hover over the corner and hold Shift while I'm rotating, which will snap this in increments. So you'll see it's over here, it's at -75, and then it just snaps in increments instead of going all crazy like that if I release Shift. So once I get that to where I want it, which is -90, we'll just position that over top of that circle. We'll need to change the fill so we can see it. And we just want to make sure that those are aligned to the center. With that, we can group that together and we can give that a name. I'll just call that play icon. And I'm going to double click to grab a hold of the circle, and we'll change that to 1E, 1E, 1E. And there I'm using the document colors just to find the right black instead of having to type it in by hand. Just a handy shortcut down there at the bottom. So now that we have that, let's also create some text. With that text selected, let's drop that down to 16 points. And I'm going to make sure it's set to semi-bold. And let's remove the uppercase by setting it to as typed. And now we can start to build this button. So we're going to use our frame here. We can actually give it a name. I just called mine Virtual Tour Button. And we're going to set it to Auto Layout. So now when I go and drag these elements inside of this, you'll see that they're going to position according to that auto layout. So if I click this button right here, which is for alignment and padding, I can adjust the padding on each side, and I can also align how I want this to be inside of this auto layout. So I want mine to be on the center, but I want more padding on the right-hand side. So I'm going to set it to 24 just to give it a little bit more space there. And now if I grab our frame and I add a nice border radius of maybe 100, give it a nice rounded look, we have this nice looking button. And I can adjust this auto layout at any time really quickly. So here, let's change the space in between to 16 just to give that text and that button a little bit more breathing room. And we have this nice button. And we can just click and drag and drop that into our design. So 60 points from the bottom and 80 on the side. And so with that, we've got a nice looking design. So now what I want to do is I want to start getting into prototyping. So prototyping really quick here in Figma. Anything you select, like the text element here or this frame, you can drag out a wire from. You'll see this little icon, this little circle, and you hover over it, you get a plus. So in this case, let's drag a wire from this to this. So when I click on, click, this text, it's going to animate to this screen. And you can choose how you want it to do that. So for example, let's do a push, and we can choose the direction we want it to push. In this case, let's push it to the left. And then we'll do the same thing here. We'll click on this text and we'll go back. And Figma is smart, so it automatically remembers everything. This time, let's just reverse it and we can take a look at what we have. So here on the start screen, when I hover over the start text, you'll see my cursor change. When I click that, it pushes that over. And when I click it, it pushes it back over. So that's a very simple interaction. Let's go over Smart Animate now. So Smart Animate looks at the differences between two identical layers. So for example, here is ellipse 1 and here is also ellipse 1. If I were to rename this ellipse 2, Smart Animate will not work. But since it's named ellipse 1, we can change this one. So let's put it like way over here. And when I set up my trigger, so we're going to do again on click, but this time we're going to set this to Smart Animate. And then we'll do the same back. So we'll just drag that wire back over. And since they're the same, when we take a look at our prototype, when I hover over the circle, you'll see my cursor change. When I click it, it smartly animates to its new position. And so that's basically how you prototype in Figma very simply. So auto animate is looking at the difference between the start state and the end state and smartly animating that. And then you have also some transitions like push, and you can dissolve things to just move from screen to screen. So back over to our design. What we need to do is set up that start and end state. So I'm going to select our design and hit Command D to duplicate it. We'll call this one start and this one end. I'm going to put some space in between them. And what I want to happen in our prototype is when we click login, which we're about to create, I want this to slide in from the side, which is hidden, into its current position. So what we need to do is I'm going to put this touching the side of our start screen. And right now it's currently not inside of the start screen. So we can just drag login frame down in there. And now you can see it is underneath our start screen in the layers panel, letting us know it is nested in there. And that's why we can no longer see it. So what I want to do now is I'm going to copy our navigation, and we're just going to create a login and register link. And so now that we have those, we'll just put those 80 points from the side of our screen. And then for this one, we're going to put a larger spacing in between them of 120, just to better space that out. And then we'll drag over our virtual tour button so that it's 80 from the side as well. So right there, we have set up our start state. Now this is what our end state's going to look like. But since we just created some new links, we'll have to add those to our end state, or else they're just going to disappear when we start animating. So I'm going to put them in the same spot they were on the other design. And I actually want these to stay here, and I want the login frame to slide over top of it. So now swapping over to the prototype tab, when we select the login text, I'm going to drag a wire over, and this is going to be on click. It's going to navigate to the end screen, and we're going to smart animate that, and we'll set the easing at in and out. Then over here, let's go with the create an account button. When we click on that, I'm going to drag my wire back over to the start. Figma remembers the exact settings we just used, so those will work. And you'll also notice that now we have flow 1, and we can rename that if we'd like, or give it a description so we know more about it. If we're making a larger file, it's great that Figma lets you know that's where an interaction is starting, so you can find it again in a sea of frames. So let's go ahead and click the present. And so here is our start screen. When we hover over the login button, our cursor changes, letting us know we can click on it. When we click on it, our form slides over. When we hit create account, it slides back over. And we've now designed and created a prototype here in Figma. So that's going to do it for this Figma crash course video. I hope in this video that you got a solid understanding of Figma and you feel comfortable going out and starting to design some awesome designs in Figma on your own. Of course, I'm going to have more Figma content coming on the channel soon, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of those future videos. Special thanks to Milanote for sponsoring today's video and making it all possible. If you'd like to check out their product for planning your next creative project, check out the link at the top of the description. Check out these videos for more design-related content, and as always, have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.